Hi, this is John Krelzik, the writer and director of AScension. What we're going to do now is go through a collection of still photographs and drawings, artwork from AScension, and I'll give you a little tour as we go along. You can fast forward to the next slide just by pushing the chapter button on your DVD. This first image is a preliminary drawing by Carol Klaus of the AScension station, which is on the surface of Titan. We came up with a three-armed approach, whereas one arm of the station would be the engineering and technical area, one arm would be the living area, which is in the lower left, and the other arm would be kind of the scientific and research parts of the station, which extends out to the what we called the observation area or the observation windows. You can see where the stairs go, and in the center of this is what we call the gateway, which allows you to go to any of the different areas of the station. This is the station again with the gateway showing how a ship lands, and the idea with the rappelling is that because the station was never really a functional unit, it was kind of a preliminary scientific base. Supplies and so forth would be pretty infrequent, so there was no need to put an elaborate system of stairs or ladders in, so it was easier just to drop the things down kind of like a funnel. This is just a close-up detail that Carol did of the gateway interior, showing the landing area for the various equipment and supplies and so forth, and a close-up of how the doors and so forth would be constructed. It'd be possible to seal this whole area off, kind of like an airlock. This is a close-up rendering of the observation area with the stairs and the windows and so forth. The idea was that most of the scientific instruments and recording information and stuff would be done from this area. This is a drawing rendering of she called it the kitchen or the galley. It's preliminary, of course. The final construction ended up slightly different than this. But the idea was that this room would not only be used as a galley, but it also could be used as a gathering area. It had multiple purposes. Also, any type of medical treatment and so forth would probably be done in this room. This final design drawing is of one of the cabins, and the idea was that for space reasons and economy reasons, they probably would not have included an entire shower and so forth. So there's basically just a stall on the other side of the bed and some storage areas under the bed and so forth. These next couple of images show the construction of the set. The idea was to construct the set as one big walkthrough, so that you really felt that the environment was real, and it gave you a sense of place in terms of the camera being able to go from one place into another. Unfortunately, mostly because of budgetary and time reasons, we ended up not being able to finish the entire station from one end to the other, which is the way I would have preferred to do it. Basically, we started with a framework made of wood. This is showing the gateway area of the construction. Here's another view of the gateway, the little smile face down in the center, which got covered up. The space that this was built in was actually a former home center building that had been divided into three sections, and right opposite the wall on the right side is actually a medical supply store. This is a detail of the steps going up the observation area, which were later covered with, I believe, some type of a fake concrete looking thing. The idea was that the materials of the station could have been set and poured into place as some type of airtight structural concrete-like material. This shows the galley under construction. We used a lot of dark paints to give more of a claustrophobic type feeling to the sets. The doors on the left are actually just facades. A lot of the lighting we did for the sets was also, we tried to incorporate it into the design of the set, where we would put the fixture through the wall and so forth, and then on the outside put movie type lamps, either ARRI 1Ks or something like that, that would shine through, obviously much brighter than what a bulb, if you actually stuck a bulb in the interior. The fluorescent lights were of course all real. Here's a detail which I particularly like of the interior of the gateway as it was finished. Carol spent a lot of time perfecting stains and drips to make things look like they'd been in use for quite a few years. The idea was that the station had been functional for about 5 years. This is the bathroom facility in the cabin. I think it's not quite finished at this point, but it's pretty much done. I particularly like the sparseness and the idea that people, when they were constructing this station, probably would not have spent very much time, if any, thinking about the aesthetics of what they were doing. So the materials all were pretty much kind of like basement looking materials, in that it was purely designed as a functional thing, which ended up creating its own aesthetic of metal and hard surfaces. Now we're going to get into the actual shooting. We only in a few rare instances did we actually build the sets so that you could take a wall out or move. The idea was that we would try to shoot it like it was real, so that the audience would get a sense that it was a real structure. So here we are working in this little hallway which we had created to get shots looking into the cabin. That's Steve Wylam, was my partner in the photography of the film. We shot the entire film in 35 millimeter, and we used an ARRI 2C, which when we did sound takes, we put inside of a blimp. This is early on in the shooting because I'm wearing a sweater, so it's obviously a little bit cooler in the sets. I kind of like this picture because it gives a feeling of my state of mind during the production of the film, which the production of the film lasted about a year from the beginning, and we shot for about 34 days during that year. What we tried to do, once the set was finished, we would start shooting all the scenes in that particular set. Ideally, as I had said earlier, it would have been nice to have the whole station finished and be able to shoot it more or less chronologically, but it just wasn't feasible. What we also ended up doing was, as sets were finished, we ended up pulling apart pieces out of a set that we had already finished shooting on to add detail elements to a new set that we were moving on to. After we finished in the cabin, we moved on to the galley, which I think was the next set that was finished. This shot is actually, we're not actually shooting movie film here. We're actually shooting the video screen footage, which we shot on beta. The guy on the right is Greg Resitar, who was the AC throughout the film. And the little guy next to him is actually his son. This is the observation area. Looking up, as you see, there really wasn't a finished top to the set. So in the shots where you see detail up at the top that was actually added digitally into the final film. We used the Chapman dolly for a couple of days, which we got at reduced rates, which helped us out to do some PEDs and so forth in the observation area. Here's another shot of the observation area. You can see what we did was kind of build a cyclorama outside of the windows. The windows were actually real glass. And the idea initially was that we would create this kind of milky atmosphere outside. So all the shots where you actually see the windows, we were running huge fans and smoke and throwing Cocoa Puffs and what have you at the windows to try to simulate the storm. There was a painting outside in the far background, which is the orange thing you see, which Carol did and kind of wrapped around the windows. This is an interesting picture. I'm not sure who took this, but what we're doing is actually trying to fix the green monitor that was up in the wall of the observation area. I believe I was the one who broke it. I think what I was trying to do was make it look a little more stained there, and somehow we ended up dumping water with paint down the middle of the monitor, and it actually blew the fuse. So our shooting had to stop, and somebody had to fix the monitor. Most of the gateway material was done. Some of it was done at the beginning of the shoot, some of it was done at the end. This was a set that pretty much remained intact until everything was torn down. This is Steve checking his light meter, although in reality it probably wasn't necessary because we pretty much shot the entire film wide open. We used 5279, which is a 500 speed stock, which at the time we were shooting the film had pretty much just come out, and we used short ends for the most part on the film, which we could get at that time for about 20 cents a foot, something like that. The platform was made so we could mount a camera and look straight down into the dome. We had to have a shot showing Paul descending or rappelling, so something had to support him at the top. This actually shows the camera looking straight down into the gateway dome. We used a Kinoptic 9.8 millimeter lens on the camera, which greatly exaggerated the depth and the size of the interior. It actually allowed us, the ceiling was I think about 17 feet high, but by putting that lens on the camera and shooting straight down, we were able to get the entire circumference of the gateway dome. This is closer to the end of shooting, I believe, which shows one of the handheld shots of Hayes coming into the gateway and starting up the emergency beacon. This is one of the few pictures that actually exist showing us shooting sound in the blimp, which is on the far right side of the picture. The features of the blimp was it had this focus control, which we ended up not being able to use most of the time because it transmitted way too much sound from the camera outside of the blimp. What the blimp does is it supposedly cuts the sound of the running camera, and if you've ever heard an ARRI 2C run without a blimp, it kind of sounds like a Caterpillar bulldozer running. When we took the focus control out, you had to block the hole in the blimp so the sound wouldn't come through where the focus control was. And one of the most technologically advanced and easy things to do was just put your finger into the hole, which is what you see here. This shot's also interesting because Steve, who co-photographed the film with me, is actually doing boom mic. So it just goes to show you sometimes on a small indie feature, you end up doing just about everything. This is shooting the last scene. If you notice, anytime possible where we could get rid of the blimp, we got rid of the blimp. Working with a camera inside a blimp it makes it heavier and much more difficult to move around. So we had a system designed so that you could just kind of pull it out and go MOS with the camera. Here's Steve actually doing his job, which is, adjusting the light and not using the boom mic. The grip in the center is Danny Sariano, who helped us out for a couple days on the shoot. This is actually the last scene that we shot in the film, and that was the landing sequence inside of the landing ship. If you look really carefully, Paul actually is holding a Ritz cracker in his hand. This is an interesting picture. The landing ship was actually pretty much more implied than real. We kind of built the front console and the glass, which is actually plexiglass, and put the chairs in, but there really was no back or front or anything like that to the set. This is the co-pilot, who was my wonderful dog for quite a few years, and Arthur has since passed on. When we were shooting the film, there were a lot of scenes where Arthur was probably right under the counter or right next to the camera during the whole shoot. He just kind of suffered through it and couldn't wait to go home. We're setting up a shot to shoot the control panel and so forth. Interesting, because Steve Wylam actually did a cameo as the pilot of the landing craft. You might see him for a second or two in the final film. The station and the ship and so forth were built as models, and we had a small studio about 15 by 25 feet, and we would completely fill the entire room with stage fog in order to give a depth to the models that we were shooting. The fog would be so deep that you really wouldn't even be able to, you could barely see your hand in front of you. We shot the scenes of the boy in Vermont. Actually, it wasn't the plan originally. It's just that the particular winter that we shot, we had no snow in Pennsylvania at all. And it was a cross-country skiing lodge. And we asked them if we could come up for a day and shoot some footage around outside. This is actually a lake that's on the back side of the cross-country skiing lodge. We used kind of the poor man's Steadicam, which is basically a 2x4 with the camera mounted and the 9.8 millimeter lens on it. And Steve and I would run behind the boy with this huge 2x4, which tended to make it much more of a fluid motion. These are some scenes that we shot, additional scenes with the boy. This particular scene doesn't appear in the final film. I think that's it.